My name is Nicole Cunha, and I'm in my last semester at SLIS. In this panel, we'll be introducing you to disability conscious building techniques and application in libraries. I just want to let you know, I've been disabled all my life, and I didn't really have the language for it up until last year, pretty much. In identifying as disabled, I can say that my disabilities include physical and cognitive ones, such as cerebral palsy, slow processing disorder, anxiety, and ADD. For the majority of my life, I felt othered in my education, and I've now found the confidence to talk about it. I want to talk about my disabled experience so others can feel comfortable doing the same. I want to bring disability thinking into libraries for children's and adult lit, at least as a starting point.
So, hi everyone, thanks for joining us right before lunch. My name is Gretyl Macalaster, and I've been advocating for disability rights and inclusion for all of my life. Although for most of my life, I didn't. Ooh, can I have the microphone? Sorry about that. So I've been advocating for disability rights for most of my life, although I didn't realize it. My dad had a disability. He had cerebral palsy that was born with. For most of my life, he walked with a cane. It affected the mobility in one side of his body. And as he got older and his body started to fail him, he had to use a motorized wheelchair. And this provided a completely different perspective on how people looked at and accepted him in society. So I am doing this presentation today and looking at this work of making libraries more accessible to continue the work that my dad did for almost 70 years and the people that who loved him did. And to make sure that the world is more accessible for my nephew, who also lives with CP today, and for everybody who is differently bodied than me. So we have a lot of things that we're going to talk to you about today, but first we'd like to introduce you to our esteemed advisor, Mare O'Toole.
You never know I was a technology librarian for quite a while. Yes, I'm a Simmons graduate. I graduated in 1987. And I've been working pretty much to give voice to the voiceless since then. My voice being part of it, because being disabled it's a very interesting thing in the world. You have to constantly negotiate your identity with employers, with people you work with. So it has some very interesting implications. And I love working with these guys. You know, I have to say it's wonderful to be at this conference. I'm just totally impressed by everything you're doing, and it makes me feel very warm that you're all going to be librarians. So I'm going to actually leave it at that, and you'll hear more of my story later.
So the first thing that we wanted to do is to just show you a little video to sort of just get us thinking sort of outside of our own abilities and what the world might look like and be like if it was designed for people with disabilities. So again, we just wanted to show that video to show, you know, we sort of walk around, us who are able-bodied and have systems that are designed for us, payphones that we can reach, books that are in language that we can understand, but what if the world wasn't like that? So we were hoping to do a little activity with you today to get all of us sort of talking about our own experience. So we'd like you to just take 2 to 3 minutes at home. If you have somebody, even a cat you'd like to talk to about this, that would work. But just turn to somebody next to you and talk a little bit about your experience working with or living with people with disabilities. And so we'll have you do that for just 2 to 3 minutes, and then we'll come back and hopefully some of you will be willing to share some of those experiences with us. Okay, so if you want to just wrap up your chats in person and at home, we'll come back together as a group.
Ideally, we would have had a whiteboard or some kind of paper to write everything down on, but I'm going to facilitate while Gretyl takes notes. So, in the brief time that you guys started talking about all this, what are some things that came to mind immediately? And please note, there are no wrong answers. I'm going to keep an eye on the social media table as well, so just raise a hand or something. So, who wants to take a stab at this? Yep, yes?
How the burden is on students to identify how to, I was thinking about how the burden is on students to go and find these resources and figure out who the person is, especially in a campus environment, who is the correct contact person to gain access to things to facilitate like classroom, like being able to do assignments and things like that, and how that's, I feel like that is those offices are kind of interviews, but ultimately it's still like an administrative kind of process to even get access to the things that you need to do your education.
I mean, for the Disability Services Office, for example, there's always that kind of blurb at the end, like, if you need accommodation, go to this office. And it's always on the student to get the paperwork, meet with the professor, talk about deadlines and all that lovely stuff. Having to do it pretty much all my life, it gets a bit tedious. But yeah, that's definitely a good thing to think about. All right, anyone else? Claudia?
Hi, just that, you know, people learn differently, and that often in a lot of our courses and just in general, it's catered more towards academic thinking, or it's all text-based. And I talk about this all the time, but people are visual learners, they're kinesthetic learners, and to have people sit through 3 hours of lecture, especially if you have you know, a bad back or other things as well, like it's very difficult, it can be painful, and it's not necessarily the learning experience that's it's not as enriching for everyone, I think.
I mean, to add to that, one thing I found in academia is that we change critical theories very, very, very often. And having to change your mindset from one critical theory to another, it can be very disorienting. As a little aside here, does anyone know Shelley Cazada's 422 class, Underserved Populations? In class yesterday, Mare and I will talk about this a little bit later. We actually were shown a video about how students with learning disabilities have to, or have a lot of pressure put on them in the classroom. And as a student with a learning disability, I find it's very hard to focus, especially in the 3-hour-long classes. I mean, the 15-minute breaks help, but I really appreciate it when professors have more breaks, or at least let students know they can move around a lot more often. So thank you for bringing that up. Yes. Anyone else? Grace? And we do have some mics at the social media table also.
Kind of as somebody who's not really been aware of a lot of this stuff for like pretty much all of my learning about any of this kind of diversity has really been within the last 3 years. And it's mostly been by virtue of exposure to, a lot of the lovely people who are in this room at the moment. But also it's like, it kind of seems like unless you know about things, like unless you know about resources and so forth, you don't know about it, you don't think about it. So like for somebody like me, I can, I'm fairly able, so a lot of, you don't think about a lot of this stuff until it's brought to your attention. So that's what I have to say about that.
Don't worry.
Perfect segue for our presentation.
We have a lot of things that are happening. We'll keep you updated, to say the least.
I think we have one more, Nicole. Oh, we're talking about me?
Yes.
So Sam and I were talking, and I'm thinking about how in order to make an educational experience or a collegial experience for somebody who is differently abled, whatever kind of disability it might be, there are so many layers that you have to be cognizant of. Sam was talking about how she has a student with low sight that she works with who gets a lot of like additional pressure from her colleagues because she doesn't work at the same pace that they do. So thinking about that, and I have a deaf friend that I work with a lot as well, and her interpreters are great about doing the very like straight interpretation of the lecture and the professor's words, but there's a lot of conversation that goes on during different points in the class that they're chatting during, and that's, you know, because I am capable of hearing it, I can catch, you know, answers to questions we're having that other students are talking about. So I've had to like train them in a way to translate what's going on at 360 around the classroom. So I guess just being aware of like the different levels that you have to pay attention to in order to accommodate.
Definitely. There are so many things that you have to be cognizant of. And one thing I wanted to stress here is that there are so many different disability cultures you have to be cognizant of. But we don't have enough time to go through all the resources, all the cultures. That's not the presentation itself. So we're just going to keep moving forward. Sorry?
It's a whole class.
I agree. But if anyone at home or in person wants to talk to us about it later, let us know. We're all here. I could talk about it for hours. Thanks for putting up with us.
So I think you guys touched on a lot of the topics that we want to talk about today. So initially we just wanted to sort of get everybody thinking about different types of disabilities, because disability comes in many different forms. There are invisible disabilities. There are disabilities that we can see. And if you've met one person with a disability, you've met one person with a disability. So how cerebral palsy presents itself in Nicole is very different than how it presented in my dad. It's different for every single person. So I think this idea of being cognizant of these different layers and levels is really important. So, let's see.
Can I add something with that? People might even not identify themselves as disabled. I say I'm a disabled person because I've accepted it as part of my identity. Person-first language of person with a disability is the political correct term. Other people say they are disabled advocates. And then just this week, one of my activist friends online, he came up with the term person of disability. And I think that's pretty cool. But again, another conversation in itself.
So speaking of cool, one of the things that Mare is going to talk about today is the cool factor.
Cool factor, and embedded a little bit in our society, because we were all raised in a culture that portrays disability actually as an element of fear. And I challenge people to think about the media that you watch. If you watch TV or movies, look at who the villains are. Because quite often the villains are going to have some sort of blemish, whether it be physical, psychological, and you know, the ones you can think of immediately are like Captain Hook, the Hunchback of Notre Dame, you know, all of the traditional villains have disabilities. And it's a shorthand for fear. So a lot of that is based in fear, and the fear comes from the fact that probably if you live to be 80, you're going to have something going on, and you may have it going on now, you may have a family member with it going on, so you know there's a level of fear behind it. So it's getting beyond that to who the person is. The cool factor is something that I've been experiencing. Again, it's something that's come and gone through my life. I had polio, and grew up with that at a time when there was no special ed. So you know, I had no trouble laying about me with crutches and kind of keeping people in line. And you know, stopped using them, used a cane, went back to crutches, and have off and on used like a motorized scooter, and that's sort of what my identity in the library world has been. I've been a librarian since 1987. But when I was, should I tell the case right here or not? That's further up. Never mind. We'll get to that. But the cool factor is something to keep in mind with, when you're working in a library and you're working with people who have disabilities, people will try very hard for you not to know, either not to know they have the disability or not to know just how hard it is, because it really is a pain in the butt. My cool factor this year has been I went from using crutches to using a wheelchair again. And the crutches were miserable. I was in pain and I was dragging around and I was slow, and I had trouble working in the center that I run because it was just so big, and I almost fell down. It was floor slippery with the crutches, and all of these things. Went back to a chair and suddenly I can fly again, and which is another pet peeve, because like in media too, the language that's used can be very important, and I'll guarantee probably at least 3 times this week some form of media, whether it's the TV news or the newspaper, will use the term wheelchair bound. And there's nothing bounding about a wheelchair. It's total freedom. It's wheelchair user is the proper term. But the concept of, it's a judgment that's being made that to be using a wheelchair or to be using an assistive device or to have a disability is a bad thing. And most of my friends who have been disabled for any length of time would say that if they had the choice of getting rid of their disability, it vanishing tomorrow, they wouldn't do it because it's what made us who we are. And it actually can be a positive thing. It also makes us sometimes very powerful advocates and pretty formidable. I mean, in universities, I've worked at Boston College, I worked at Lesley University, I worked at Northeastern, I worked at a few of them. I'm at Wheelock now. When I roll into a room, it's the forgotten diversity, for one thing. In most colleges, they're dealing with issues of race and issues of gender identity, and it kind of stops right there until like someone like me rolls into the room and they kind of go, oh yeah, and you, because it's just not thought of. And this is something that is good to raise awareness of, because it can benefit everybody. And there's a whole other talk that goes with that.
So in terms of disability being an area that's overlooked in many places, one of them is in employment. So I apologize, as we're talking about accessibility, about these slides. For anybody who's colorblind, we'll try and point out here that there's blue, green, and red sections of this. But if you see these statistics, people without disabilities are employed at a much higher rate than people with disabilities. So these are statistics pulled from the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And the bottom graph is employment rates for people with disabilities. So according to their press release, 17.5% of people with disabilities are employed, and about 12.5% are unemployed, which leaves this big gaping hole of 70% of people or so that are what? Unemployed, not employed, underemployed. So we believe that this is also an unemployed group of people with disabilities. And there are many reasons why people with disabilities are not employed. And obviously, many times it's because they are simply overlooked. So Nicole and I are going to get into talking about some of the research that we've done with libraries, but to get into that, we wanted Mare to talk about her revenge path to librarianship and how she ended up starting in being a librarian.
Well, I grew up the street from the Allen Public Library and spent every waking hour in there pretty much as a kid. And of course, when you're 14, you can work. So I'm watching all the other kids in town go through and become pages and getting very excited because I'm going to go and apply for a job, which I did. And then continued to watch every kid in town get the job and never got a call. And after about a year, I finally was so pissed off, I approached them. Because it wasn't, self-advocacy was not something, it's something you learn. And you have to get really pissed off to get good at it. So I was pissed off, and I confronted the library director, and I said, hey, every kid in town has had this job. How come you haven't called me? I'm in here all the time. You all know me. I live down the street. And they all sort of looked embarrassed and shuffled around and said, oh, we didn't think you could do it. So they ended up hiring me. I stayed there longer than any kid they ever employed, right up through college and beyond. I ended up being working at the desk, and then got laid off by Prop 2.5. But it launched me into sort of revenge librarianship, because it was a way, one of the things I've always believed is knowledge is power. And I could see there is a power there. And also giving voice to the voiceless, which in my case was my voice, but it's seeing, you know, how many people could be helped by having access to those resources. And I've had this reflected talking to other now people who are library directors who also embarked on a similar course for a similar reason. You know, I've spent my entire life sort of working on projects that will advance this and make it possible for people to get employment and to contribute, because there's some tremendous contributions people can make when they're given a chance. But you have to get the chance first.
So this isn't a direct segue into the research that I'm doing for one of my classes this semester. If anyone knows Laura Saunders' Radical Librarianship class, woot woot isn't where it's coming out of. So one of the service projects we're doing this semester is assistive technology. The original description was for a database, but it's a pretty big project. So my two co-people and I are working on at least a toolkit for this project. And I might go a long time with this, just cut me off when you need to. So the first thing is, there are 24 Boston Library branches. This is huge. My group mates and I are hoping to do a sampling of 10 of them, but we haven't even created a survey for them yet. That's where Shelley Cazada of the Massachusetts Board of Library Commissioners, MBLC, comes in, and a lot of her resources that I get from her underserved populations class I've used across the board here. They actually have a survey that they're creating for the MBLC, and their goal is basically to have a database of assistive technology, AT, in all the branches, and to see what the librarians know they have, what they need to include, and to make sure there's training for the librarians so it isn't left up to the patrons to teach the staff. That's another thing we're gonna get into eventually, I hope. So for right now, we're hoping the toolkit will be in the form of a LibGuide, sort of modeled after ASCLA, the Association for Specialized and Cooperative Library Associations. I think I said that twice. But the tabs we're hoping to have are background of the ADA to make sure they're compliant, accessibility policies modeled by ASCLA, articles and resources created by us, and hopefully there's a way for other librarians to add to this. Links for free technology that we can add and technology to purchase. One thing we really want librarians to get out of this is that to have the librarians and patrons know there are resources out there for us, to know where they are, what improvements can be made, and also so there's a record of all this. I'm still trying to figure out all the reasoning, so bear with me. Let's see. I think that was pretty much all of what I want to say here. But this is just one project of things that I'm going for. If anyone knows me from a children's lit side, they probably have an idea that I want to bring children's lit into libraries. I want to use middle grade and YA novels as a kind of medium for facilitation on talking about what is disability, how is it portrayed, what are the tropes that we see, and this goes into what Mare was talking about earlier with media. The tropes are everywhere. You just have to notice them. The field itself for disability was created in 2005 So there's a lot of research that's being built. There are a lot of foundational texts for it. Another list I can go on forever for. And the disability is one identity that overlaps with all others. If there's one thing you take out of today, please remember that. Your patrons can be queer, they can be African American, they can be of mixed race, but they can also be disabled. There's not one way to identify. They can identify in a variety of ways. You just have to remember that they're not on paper, they're real people. And for the second point I wanted to stress is that we need to qualify what libraries are doing to accommodate patrons with disabilities. And if you can see here, there's a library scan from Shelley's class that I'm going to share later on, that librarians can, and by librarians I mean anyone in the LIS field, can see where they fall short of working with the ADA and see what they can improve on with this document. So please use it. It's invaluable. I found it really helpful with other projects. And okay, that's my spiel. Moving on.
So just very briefly, I'll talk just a little bit about the early research that I've done. So my original plan for my capstone was to look at how well libraries, particularly public libraries, are providing access to people of all abilities. So this has started with an early lit review and a look at sort of local area libraries. And one area where we're definitely seeing some more success is in children's programming, particularly for students with autism and for other sensory perception disabilities. And so what's really wonderful about this kind of programming is that it's open to all kinds of kids. So for parents who are afraid to bring their kids to a story time because they picture libraries as quiet and think their child needs to sit still and listen to a story, these are spaces where kids of all abilities can move around. They have fidgets, like we're given in many of our bags today. They are encouraged to get up and move around, and programming is designed to be more about engaging stories and interactive activities than just sitting and listening to a story. There's also some research that's been done about e-readers and about e-text and how that can be made more accessible for people with various disabilities. So again, this is very early in the research stages, but it's something that I hope to continue doing in my professional career upon graduation also, so that we have a better idea of how well libraries are doing and to provide resources for public libraries to do this better. So as we look at this, we wanted to show you a couple of examples of success. So the first one is the Child's Place, which comes out of the Brooklyn Public Library in New York. And the webpage isn't that pretty, but they provide a lot of different programming for children of all abilities based on universal design, and that's something we'll talk a little bit about. So this is about fostering inclusive environments for children of all abilities. And this talks specifically about how it does not have to be children with disabilities. So this is about creating environments where children of all abilities can enjoy activities together. So they have after-school story times, read and play activities, garden club, Lego activities, and a universal makerspace, which is something we've been learning a lot about from Mare as well. So that's one great example. And then also I just looked at the Portsmouth Public Library, which is my hometown, which has recently started a sensory story time in response to the community who said we need this activity, and parents who said we need to be able to have this. And it's been really wonderful because it's a Saturday morning and all sorts of kids just wander in and, you know, see us blowing bubbles and just stick their faces on the glass like bubbles. I need to create a bubble. So it's been a really great experience to be part of that. And the next success story that we wanted to talk about is just a couple blocks away, the EARL Center for Learning and Innovation, where Mare is the director and Nicole is an employee, so they're going to talk a little bit about what they're doing over there.
The EARL Center was funded by,
microphone. Yeah, I have a soft voice too. It was funded by an alum about 3 years ago. It's the EARL Center for Innovation and Learning. And they funded the center without a really clear idea of what it would be. It was originally a little dusty in the basement curriculum resource center where people made art stuff. We serve teachers, Wheelock College. We serve teachers, social workers, child life workers, and you guys too. If you want to come and check us out, please do, because we're all part of the same consortium. And so my reputation is being uncontrollable and a troublemaker, so they hired me to come in and help figure out what to do with this space. And what I've done is looked at what's going on in the world. So I've spun it with the third space concept, which is it's not home, it's not dorm, it's not work. It's a place where you come and be in community. So the students come and they work together, they play together, they eat pizza. We have hip hop dances, we have parties, we have lots and lots of training, because I'm also spinning it on the concept of the Heart of the Communities grant from the Knight Foundation, where I finally figured, I was talking about this yesterday, couldn't remember the three concepts, but it's people come to and stay in community for cultural offerings, for aesthetics, and for sense of openness. So everybody who works there, the first thing I say to them is love everybody that comes in the door and make their day better. And that's what we do there, and we encourage people to play. So not only with we have a manipulatives and toy collection, but we have 3D printers, we have Arduinos, we have Raspberry Pis, we have lots and lots of art supplies, and we encourage people to come in and be inventive and try things out. And part of my passion, because I sort of go off, my entire life I follow different tracks. And the current one is making sure that maker spaces are accessible for everybody, because it's huge. You can get grants through the Board of Library Commissioners, you can apply for LSTA grants for maker spaces. They're doing maker spaces at the White House. It's becoming a huge thing, but you hear very little or nothing about what about the kids who need something, or the people who need something extra. How do you work with a community of people who are deaf in a maker space, or people who are blind, or autistic people, the whole range. And so one of the things, I guess it would be my research project, is to make sure that there are resources to help people keep it accessible and to help people start them up in the first place.
Can you see why I love this woman? And I've only been working here for 6 months, and we've already had so many projects. I basically didn't even have to interview. I went in and we started talking about all the different things that she wanted to do. I'm just like, yes! Let me do all the things. Seriously, Brian can talk about it for hours. Your passion projects, they consume you, which I'm happy about this one. Anyway, I'll keep this as professional as I can. The EARL Center is one of the most welcoming places that I can think of. The EARL Center is one of the most welcoming places I've found in the consortium. I know Assistive has had a couple projects there already. We're having a couple the rest of this semester. But where was I going with this? Oh dear.
I keep thinking, come to the dark side. We have toys.
Yes, toys are awesome. Speaking of toys, I wanted to definitely say that one of the things I loved about the EARL Center in the initial tour that Mare gave me all the way back in October was that they have toys that have trachs, they have walkers, they have wheelchairs. They have toys that have equipment that children don't see every day. And as a person that grew up very separate from the disability community, it's very validating to see this. As a quick aside, I was playing with American Girl dolls until I was maybe middle school, and I would use the wheelchairs all the time. I would break their legs on purpose. I would break my Barbie's legs off to have something that I felt represented me. that I'm getting way off track here. The EARL Center, I would say, it's a place where we can come together. The walls come down, you can make it one big area. We have coffee. I know a lot of you are coffee lovers. We're hoping to get that as a permanent installation. Our technology is up front and center. You can play with it all the time. We have touchscreens, they're cool. Raspberry Pis when they don't walk away. That's an ongoing problem. But one thing I love about the EARL Center is also Mare has an ongoing collection of books that she lends out. Seriously, I've had so many, I've added to my reading list in this past year. I'm just like, wow. But I'm rambling too much. Seriously, please just come visit us. For those of you at home, there are a few virtual tours we can do, but we're at our 5-minute mark, so I'm going to cut myself off here. Okay.
So in addition to the EARL Center, we wanted to share some additional resources for you. So what we've tried to do today is just provide an introduction to this conversation about accessibility, like many of the other discussions that we're having today. So a lot of these resources are also on the handout that we gave you as well. So the first one is a local agency CAST, which is focused on universal design and learning. So this is not just about thinking about universal design in spaces, but about universal design in programming and curriculum instruction. So they're just based just north of Boston here, actually. Another great resource that's also based right here in Boston is WGBH's National Center for Accessible Media. This is another really unpleasant website to look at, but they created Magpie, which is the original free caption and audio description authoring tool, which makes multimedia more accessible. I challenge any of you to watch a YouTube video that hasn't been properly captioned by somebody with the sound off and see if you can make any sense of it, because it is virtually impossible, and this happens a lot if you're watching a live television show with somebody who's profoundly hard of hearing and needs the captions. So I think that a lot of progress is being made in this area, and WGBH was really one of the first to lead the charge in doing this better. And the last one that we wanted to talk about that's also local and amazing is the Perkins School for the Blind, particularly their library. So the Perkins Library circulates more than 500,000 accessible books, newspapers, and publications in Braille, large print, and digital audio formats. And the library is open and accessible and free to any resident of Massachusetts. It also serves people around New England and the country, and they provide unique resources to libraries also. So libraries can call up the Perkins and say, hey, I need to do a better job of creating a collection that's accessible to people who are visually impaired, and they will do that and provide those resources. So these are three agencies that we're very lucky to have in the Boston area to assist us with creating more accessible libraries. So in addition to the EARL Center. So we wanted to just talk a little bit more about, now you're entering the field, what can you do? So the first thing is what you're doing today. Educate yourself. Understand and learn more about different communities of people with disabilities. Learn about deaf culture, learn about people who are visually impaired. Just sort of think about what life might be like, because we're all, I think one of my favorite terms is temporarily able-bodied. So at some point we are all going to experience some sort of disability in our lives, and so it's good to educate ourselves and seek exposure to other cultures. Always consider universal design when you're thinking about programming. If your library is coming up with a new space, borrow a wheelchair, find a friend in a wheelchair and have them go through and see if they can really access the library. So it's about thinking outside of ourselves when we're planning these things. And learn about the adaptive technologies that are available in your library. Learn how to use them so that if somebody comes in and needs a computer with a screen reader, you know how to access that kind of assistive technology. And try and implement change in your own library, even if it's getting somebody to move a desk around so that it doesn't just simply meet ADA compliance, but actually can serve somebody who comes in a wheelchair and isn't just a storage space, which you will see a lot in academic libraries if you look at it. And the last thing you can do is visit our website, which is a work in progress, I can tell you right now. So www.compassionatelibrary.net is a website that was started by Mare, and that she has graciously given Nicole and I permission to update with resources and information about disability communities. So we'll include a lot of scholarly articles that we've included, annotated bibliographies, as well as websites and resources that we think will be helpful to you in your careers.
One last thing I wanted to include, for the point of educating yourself, please don't leave it to the disability community to do that for you. Please be an ally to the disability community and talk to them if you're confused about something. Sorry. Yes, so please, don't just leave it to the marginalized groups to tell you what to do. And if you have any questions, please see us after. Thank you so much.
Okay, so that was amazing. Thank you. And I definitely agree. Google is your friend. Don't leave it up to people to teach for you. You can learn on your own. So we have time for just a couple of questions. Are there any questions out there? Anybody?
Don't be afraid now.
Yeah.
I think I have more of a comment. As you were all talking, I was just sort of thinking about the qualities that people look for in candidates for a job, and that's the ability to improvise and constantly be challenged and overcome things. And it's just very bizarre to me how that is not associated as qualities that people have that are able-bodied or not able-bodied. And I just think that it's, kind of amazing that that doesn't come through.
Yeah, it's true. I mean, I've had, one of the things when people, learn a little bit about me, I've had a lot of jobs. And it's not because I've been asked to leave them. I get bored, to be honest, and see something interesting and say, I need to go do that for a while. So I've worked in a lot of libraries. I mean, I've been Boston Public, and prior to the EARL Center, I was the head of almost everything at the Medfield Public Library. I worked my way through every job in there. And web manager, I was a systems librarian, I was head of reference, I was head of circulation. That's a wonderful comment because it's true. It's constant problem solving and constant, overcoming any problem that comes along. I mean, especially when you're in the public library, you have no money, so you have to figure out how to do things very creatively. But it's very difficult to, I think of the librarian, especially directors. I work with a lot of directors. I know there are a number of them with invisible disabilities, which they don't share. But I've met very few physically disabled directors. I think I met one at the NELA conference this year who was also using a wheelchair, and she's the only one I've met in the longest time. So as I say, disability, it causes fear. And it's also seen as costing money because they, either insurance companies connected with the library, and I know this happened in Medfield because I sort of heard the feedback later. They were horrified that they were hiring me because, what if something happened and I cost them money? Or what if I needed some sort of accommodation, which I have to say actually happened while I was there. It totally flabbergasted me. They had a reference desk that was like, I called it the queen of information throne. It was incredibly high. I mean, it practically came up to my chin when I was standing. And I used to have to climb up on the computer to get up on the chair, which I'd fall off of 2 or 3 times a day because it was so high, to lord it over the poor patrons who would come in and be down there, you want some information? And the director there, who I have to say is up in Gloucester now and is fabulous, had a carpenter come in and she literally cut the reference, this beautiful, oak reference desk. She had him cut it in half and bring it down to a level that was comfortable for a wheelchair and for the patrons too to sit in a chair and talk to me. And I wasn't used to that level of accommodation. But on the other side, that's sort of what they imagine. It's going to cost me a fortune to take care of you, because that taking care of the And that's part of the cool factor, because you have to look really cool and like everything you do is effortless, because God help you, someone might try to, help you. Like the very sweet Chinese gentleman who came, we get a lot of international visitors, and he was a kindergarten teacher from China who didn't speak English, and he insisted on grabbing the wheelchair and when I gave them a tour of the EARL Center and pushing me everywhere, despite my timid protests, because that was what he saw, he needed to do. So it's a very interesting world to negotiate. And if anybody ever wants to do an experiential thing, this is something we've been working on, and the last one I did was at the Northampton Public Library. We brought in the whole range of wheelchairs and goggles and gloves and the whole thing, and gave everybody a disability basically, and sent them out into their library to experience it differently. And there are different trains of thought about this. Some people say, well, you can get up at the end and walk away, but your body doesn't forget. So it's an incredible experience.
If I could add to that, we just had an experiential thing at the EARL Center yesterday for Shelley's class. Megan Roper, one of my colleagues, she is legally blind, and she brought a few canes in for us to try out. I know the EARL Center, and I know the different fabrics that they have on the floor, the different floor types, and even I had a hard time navigating that. And there's more I would love to say, but we are close for out of time, I think.
Yeah, sorry, I don't want to cut anybody off. This has been amazing, and I think we have one online question. We have to be really, really quick. I'm so sorry, we're way over time.
Okay, this is from online. What can we do to push for improved HTML coding on websites for screen readers? Also, how can we promote accessibility to screen readers that are not prohibitively expensive?
There are free screen readers.
There are free screen readers. Is it NVDA?
NVDA.
NVDA is something that you can download, and actually Megan uses it in the center. Also Chrome has an add-on that will also work as a screen reader, but it's almost impossible to turn off. My computer's still talking to me when I don't want it to. And in terms of HTML, the World Wide Web Consortium is actually at MIT. Tim Berners-Lee, who basically invented the web, works there, but Judy Brewer is the head of accessibility for that, and they're working very hard to create standards to make things more accessible and keep things accessible. And they have a web page, another ugly one, actually. It's like total words and awful. But the information is pretty fabulous, and they have some tools that you can download also that will help, make things accessible and let you test to see if it's working or not.
And that's W3C has a website that you can find a lot of their accessibility info on.
I would also say keep posted for another presentation later on today. I have to say you'll be seeing me again. I'm in another group looking at digital accessibility in libraries, archives, and cultural institutions. So keep posted.
Thank you.